Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining me. I'm Shayna Cersei. I'm so excited to paint with you today. So today we are going to be painting a cardinal, a lovely little sweet bird in the snow sitting on a pine branch of some kind with a little bit of a blue and green background. So we are going to, I'm going to change up the composition a little bit on this one here. You can see the outline. For those of you who are new to my channel, thanks for joining me. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share with friends who also enjoy watercolor or would like to learn. And then also in my studio crew, so in the description of this video, you'll be able to find links to supplies as well as to join my studio crew where you can get more or additional videos and tutorials as well as the outlines for these projects. That is a monthly subscription. Join anytime, cancel anytime. You can get in there and you have access to everything, and you can come and go as you need as your kind of painting journey evolves. So we are going to be painting this cardinal today, and we're going to be using a couple of different colors. I'm painting on Arch watercolor paper, or Arches as it's more commonly known in the States. I am using my my Princeton Velvet Touch brush, size 10, and I'm also probably going to be using, I have a size 4 Princeton Select brush, and this teeny tiny, this is a Pro Art brush. I got it in England, but it's the only teeny tiny brush I have of this kind, and I'll just be using this for the eye and the very fine detail in there. But this is a Pro Art size 2, but yeah, and it says England right on there. So that when I went to England, I picked up some art supplies. Okay, so we are going to get started with laying down our first layer. So we're going to start, and you can really do a cardinal in a really kind of simple, almost flat wash, and not add too much detail to it, and it'll still translate as a cardinal. But I'm going to be introducing some really fun colors. I really love a really bright, colorful cardinal, and here I can show you the difference. So this one was really done in only reds with a little bit of Dioxizine Purple added for the shadows, like a tiny little bit just to deepen that red. And I think this one looks fine. It looks like a cardinal, but it looks a little flat. I like to add color. So I'm going to be adding some yellows here for highlighted areas, as well as blues for the darker areas, in addition to a little purple. So obviously red and blue make purple, so I'll be adding some blues with the reds to make purple, but I might pick up a little Dioxazine Purple just to kind of move us along, but we'll see. And then the mask here is just a Payne's gray. But we'll get to that. I'll go over colors as we go. And again, you can look in the description for them as well. So I'm going to start with my cadmium red. This is a really great, bright, vibrant red. And it's a little opaque for a watercolor. So the cadmium colors always have a little bit of opaqueness to them. They're not as transparent as some of the other colors, which can be really beneficial when applied in certain applications. So I'm going to be just laying down with my size 10 brush, kind of right along the breast of this cardinal. I am going to leave some gaps of white as I go, and just kind of sketching in this red. Now, because I'm working on 100% cotton paper, I have a little time that the edges of these aren't drying right away, the edges of this paint. So I have time to go back in and add water to blend these things out. I'm just blending. And I'm really gonna kind of get, 2/3 of the way. I am gonna do the top of the head here in this color as well. A little crown here on this guy. Cardinals are so cool to see in the wintertime, especially if you're in an area, I don't know where you can see cardinals. Well, obviously I live in the Northeast in the US and I can see cardinals all the time, and we live in a very snowy area in the wintertime. So they look super brilliant on like a stark white background of snow. They're really cool when you spot one. All right, so now I'm going to start, and you can see I am kind of fading out here around his back and over his wing. But I'm going to start now to pick up. I have a very warm yellow here. This is a Diarylide Yellow. And I'm just going to drop in some of that yellow right over the red. So it's going to give it an orangey feel at first, which is fine. And we're going to be mixing these colors right on the page. So just pulling some more red around here, if you can see that, around his like collar where his feathers might be, giving that a little definition. And as I continue to build layers here, you know, I'll be putting on darker colors of red and darker shades and these darker blues. So it'll really start to pull it together, but leave some contrast. It won't be this very kind of stark, here's yellow, here's red. So trust the process, trust the process. You know, and as you go, it's your painting. You can assess. You can be like, oh, this is really, you know, too yellow for my liking, or too red for my liking, or whatever. I really need a darker shadow there, or I prefer to paint in lighter pastel-y colors, or with more pop. I tend to paint really saturated colors, really bright saturated colors. All right, so I am feeling good here. I'm going to bring some of this red down into this outer wing. Now the wings have a lot of grays and blues in them that you might not see right away when you first look at a cardinal, but if you do look at photographs, the wings have a lot of grays and blues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce some cerulean. This is a core paint, so I'm using my core paints. And this is the Cerulean Blue in there, and it's like a grayish. Now I'm guessing myself on this blue, and that looks dramatic. We will take care of the drama there, and I'm going to put this blue under this wing in this shadow. So there's a wing here, kind of folded under, and now our cardinal's kind of looking like a parrot, you know, a macaw parrot with all these bright colors. But again, we're going to bring them together. And I'm going to put this blue right on the tail feather here, about halfway down. Okay. And now I'm going to start picking up more red and mixing these colors right on the page. So I'm laying red over it and mixing the blues, and this is going to make like a deeper, you know, this is a very warm red and a very warm blue. So they're making a pretty dull purple, but it translates beautifully as a shadow for the red. So it's not making a bright, vibrant, jewel-toned purple, which is fine. That's what we want. We want more of this dull color. And as they dry, I think you will see, I'm just changing the shape of this wing a little bit, giving a little bit of a point here. And as they dry and they lose some of their intensity, you'll start to see kind of more of the effect that you want. Okay, now the tail feather, we're going to put red right over this. But then as you go down to the area that doesn't have the blue under it, so that's like called an underpainting, where it's not the main focus. You don't want that color to be the main focus, but it's adding value, or it's adding color and affecting the top color in some way. So now we have this nice shadow underneath the tail feather. I'm going to leave these other two here because I'm going to paint them slightly lighter, and I don't want them to mix with this while it's still wet. There we go. All right, so we're doing pretty good here. I'm going to let this dry a little bit. I'm actually going to take my smaller brush, just a wet, clean brush. I'm going to pull some color out of this wing. It's getting a little dark for me for being on the outside here. The underside of it, yes, can stay dark. The very top of it, I'm going to pull a little bit of that color out. And then I'm actually going to go in with some of that blue in my smaller brush and create some texture, because again, their wings do have a lot of these gray kind of under feathers. All right. All right, I'm loving the beginning of this. We're getting there, and we will add lots of texture later, but let's move on to the mask. This area has had time to dry around the mask here, so we're going to add in that mask and start to add in the eye, because this is going to really start to transform it into what we know and love and recognize as our cardinal. So I'm just going to start around the beak here, and I'm painting in the Payne's gray. You could use black, and I'm just using tiny little brush strokes. And I know it kind of all comes together in the end, but I do feel like it adds texture. I'm not really going to leave too many white gaps, or any really at all. This way. I am going to use a little bleed proof white at the end to add some accents. I just love the way it looks on this particular project. All right, I'm going to get to the eye. I'm going to kind of stop there. And I've left these little gaps up here. I'm trying to decide if I want to fill them in with black or bring the red further down. And I think I'm going to bring the red further down. I like this shape of the mask there. All right, so I'm going to change my brush again, and I'm going to go to my really teeny tiny one. Now, if you have a smaller brush that's not this small but has a really great fine point on it, it will probably work just fine for you. But the eyes are very tiny detailed. So we have, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so you can see I've drawn out, and if you do get the outline for this, you can see I've drawn on a couple of layers. So we have the outer layer that is going to be black. So the very, very kind of outer circle. And then there's a layer that we're going to leave white. And then the pupil. But then inside the pupil, there is like a highlight shape. Now, also another thing you can do, if you can't leave these white highlights, you could just paint the inner pupil and kind of the outline of the outside, and then go in with bleed proof white to add the highlights. Or if you mess up, it happens, like, and you have a rogue, brush stroke, because it's such a small space, those can really change the look and feel of the eye. So don't be afraid to go in and add that bleed proof white if you've gotten this far. And I'm just going to turn my painting around, and I'm actually going to add the black up here, but I'm going to use these tiny little brush strokes to make it look more like the little feathers that it is. So I'm going to fill in that gap, but leave. So see, a little texture on the end. This section I am going to paint red in there. Oops, sorry to go off camera. Okay. And then maybe just a little texture here on the edge. Of where it overlaps. the red. Okay. There we go. So far, let's zoom back out. Here we go. All right, so it's starting to come together. We got to put in that lovely beak in a few minutes. We're going to let that black really dry. I'm going to come back down here to this tail feather, and I'm just going to pick up some cadmium red. I'm going to water it down a little bit. I'm going to use my size 4 brush. And I'm just going to paint this little section in behind. And then another one back here. Maybe give this one a little bit more red. And then I'm also going to put another layer of red now that this is dried. And you'll see what I mean when I say it's pretty opaque, this red. It covers really well. But I want this tail feather to be a little bit more redness to it. And pulling in some of that blue. You can skip this gap here. I'm going to put a branch over it. If you want to skip it to... There we go. And then I'm going to take even a little tiny, well, this is still wet, but when I'm done, I'm going to take a little bit of cobalt blue and Payne's gray, and I'm going to outline this edge here just to make it really separate. All right, so moving on to our next phase. I'm going to do some work here on the breast just to add some more of this texture. So we have this beautiful like highlight, textured highlight here. We have these feathers around the face, and I want to play that up a little bit more here. We've kind of started the foundation for that here when we put our first layer on, but let's take some of our red, and I am going to add, I think, some Dioxizine Purple. Okay, and you can see this makes a different kind of purple than the cobalt and the red mixed together. This one's a little bit brighter, a little bit more warm versus bringing it down with that cool blue. All right, and I'm just going to start to add, and you can see it still translates as red overall as the bird, but I'm just going to start to go along the breast here, up and down, kind of in the shape, so it's rounded in this direction. And I do want to, I'm going to pick up some more of this blue, just add it to the wing here, just to create separation between these two. I don't want them to get lost in each other as the same value. So you can see there's a little bit more of a shadow there. All right, and then even on the edge of the breast here, you can bring out a few little feathers so it doesn't look perfectly smooth. All right, so definitely on the underside, it is darker, but you can see I am adding layers and texture, but I'm skipping spaces, so some of that lighter layer peeks through. And I'm using this smaller brush. Now I'm going to really emphasize this here a little bit around the eye. Up here on the front of the head and in between some of these feathers, playing up some shadows up there. And then over the eye, there usually is kind of a, what do you call it? Like a brow kind of receding into the eyeball. So it's a little darker there. So like just around the eye, because the eye is pushed into the face. All right, so now I'm going to get some more like pure cadmium red, because I don't want to lose the red quality of our Cardinal. And again, I'm just going to be leaving some of this yellow peeking through. But again, Cardinals are red for the most part. They do have some gray feathers in there. But the way the sun hits them and the light hits them, and for the interest of painting, because remember, we're not painting hyperrealism here. I'm painting a Cardinal that you can recognize as a Cardinal, but that has interest in it. All right, so I'm going to paint this little collar feather here. And I'm getting this round shape here that I don't love. I'm going to pull out some color. I'm going to just drag that over it. So I'm still seeing some of that yellow through there, but it's not as harsh of a shape. All right, so let's let that dry and see how it looks once it's dry. We still have some detail work to do, but we're going to jump into the beak because that's going to kind of bring this guy all together here. Okay, so the beak, I'm going to be using my yellow, so my Diarylide Yellow, and a little of my cadmium red to make like an orangey yellow color. And I'm going to start with the top beak. I'm going to add some water. The top is going to be lighter than the bottom. So I'm going to paint in the top here. Okay, and then for the bottom, I'm going to add a little bit more red. And I'll be putting some shadows on this and highlights with the white, the bleed proof light at the end as well. All right, if you want to let the top beak dry, you can. I'm going to do my best to leave a little line between them for now. So you can see how the bottom is dramatically darker at the moment, just because I have a lot of water in there. And as they dry, they will even out a bit. So that's layer one. So top and bottom, we are going to add more details on there, as well as the detail of the line for the mouth. All right. Oh, and I forgot this little gap that I wanted to fill in. So let's fill that in now. I'm just going to put some red in there. It doesn't have to be too dramatic. All right. So let's let this guy dry on the interior, and we'll add more details to the face and some texture maybe to the wings. But we're getting really close here. Let's start to work on the background. So we're just going to have this guy in kind of sitting on a branch with some pine sprigs all about. Maybe we'll throw berries in there. I don't think so. I think we'll let the pine sprigs do their job. All right, so I'm just picking up some Van Dyke brown, and I am going to just paint in the branch, and I'm going to paint it right in front of him. See that? Because he's sitting on it. And we're going to paint in some pine like overlapping. And I'm just going to add in some of these twiggy branches. And some of these are going to have pine over them. And that is going to cover up some of the branch. And some of them are just going to be bare branches that kind of shine through, these thicker ones. So the thicker ones are going to be branches themselves. And then some of these thinner ones I'm going to paint pine sprigs on. But it's up to you. This part is pretty organic and you can do what you need to do. And I keep my strokes really sketchy. I let little white spots kind of peek through to create highlights and create texture on the branches. Turn my page so I'm not putting my hand through any branches. Wet branches smearing brown all over my page. So this you do want a good tipped brush for. You can also use a rigger brush, which I am going to get into when I use my Payne. You could use just a really good tipped brush even, but the rigger I find is even easier for folks if you use the rigger brush. So we're going to use that. We're going to bring some down below, down this way. And I think that's good for now. Just thicken this branch a little bit. There we go. All right. So now we have our nice foundation for a background. We have to let that dry. So after I've done this, I'm actually going to put in the faded background here, this kind of like bokeh feeling, this very out of focus background of blues and greens, and then we'll put in some pine. So this one I did a lot more twigs and branches versus this one, but I think it's all gonna come together in the end. But I'm gonna be doing really fine pine. These are a little thicker, chunkier pine. I'm gonna be doing really long, thin ones. So I wanna put those on last so they sit on top. But let's let that dry. Our Cardinal itself is pretty dry. Just want to make sure. All right, so this is dry enough to do a little bit more work on the beak. So the beak is looking pretty flat. It's got a highlight on the top, or it's lighter on top, darker on the bottom. But we need to add a little bit more drama under there. So I'm going to take a mix of cadmium red and this dioxazine purple with a little bit of this yellow, just to make a darker color. Sorry, you couldn't see that. So I had cadmium red here. There was this mix of cadmium red, dioxazine purple, and I added a little yellow to it. So, you know, it's a very reddish brown. I'm gonna put that underneath, kind of closest to the face here. So that's creating a shadow under there. Rinse off my brush and then same on the top. Just gonna put kind of closest to the beak. And we're just creating shadows. Oh, let me just put my hand in brown. Let's not put that. And leaving some of that lighter color poking through as the highlight. And now I'm going to take some of that Van Dyke brown, so my brown color. You could use your Payne's gray too. I'm going to use brown, I think. And I'm going to take my teeny tiny brush. You do want to make sure it's dry. And I'm going to fill in the mouth there, or give that more definition. There we go. So now he's got a nice defined beak. Rinse this off. I just want to give him a little shadow right there. And I am going to come back in with a little white on this at the very end and give him a little bit of a highlight right here on his upper lip, kind of where they meet. But yeah, that looks much better. It's got more dimension to it. It's bringing it closer. It's not as light. The beak kind of blends in with the Cardinal. They have very reddish orange beaks. All right, so let's add a little bit more texture. I'm going to take some of my cobalt blue, mix. I gotta get it a little wetter here. Or Cerulean Blue. And this was, take some of that Cerulean Blue with my red and just add, with my teeny tiny brush, just add some texture to some of these darker areas. And this is really, you know, up to you. Kind of where do you feel like you need to add texture? Again, this is not hyperrealism. This is more impression, fun. Paint it the way you want to see it, that it interests you. It still looks like a cardinal, but it's got fun, interesting textures and colors. And I'm going to define this guy over here a little bit, add a little more wing texture, like separation of pieces. With these teeny tiny brushes, if you have one, you do have to pick up paint a lot more often. So that's a thing. I'm going to make sure there's a little shadow under the wing here. There we go. And then I'm going to take a little bit of cadmium red and just put it around this eye here and around the collar again. Like a few spots right here. So we have these yellow highlights and they add interest, but I'm just adding a little red just to remind us this guy's still red with his little feathers out here. And I'm gonna add, let's see, cadmium red and dioxazine purple. Make a little darker red again. I'm just gonna add a few more. Maybe I'll take this blue. Shadows up here. There we go. All right. I love it. Okay. So we're going to kind of leave the cardinal be for now. So in the eye, you can also, just as an aside, I'm not going to do it right now, but I'm going to leave mine white. You can add a little like very watered down yellow or yellowish orange color to give the outside of the iris. Actually, let's do that. Very watered down. So I'm just taking it from white to slightly off-white. But you do want to make sure your black is really, really dry for that. Okay. Okay. I said I was going to do a little bit of an outline down here, which I am, just to define these shapes a little bit more. And then I'm going to add a little bit more red to this outer one, add some more texture. There we go. Okay, let's do the background. I think our brown is sufficiently dry. You want some clean water. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to wet my page. So my water is slightly dirty, but that's good because you can see it. But you should have clean water. So I'm just going to start to slightly wet my page. I'm going to go around my cardinal. I'm not going to wet the cardinal. I'm going to gently touch the brushes. The brushes are going to get, or the branches are going to get reactivated a little bit by this, unless they're like super bone dry, like you dry them for a couple of hours. And even then they might reactivate a little bit, but just be gentle around them. It's okay for right now. You can go back over them later, or you could do this step first before the branches. But I kind of like this. So I'm just going to do this half or this side And you're making kind of an organic edge here. You can see, again, because my water's a little dirty. And now I've started picking up some of the brown from the branches. So I'm just going to do this half first. And I'm going to start to pick up some of that cerulean. And start to just drop in some of that color. Make sure I don't leave any halos like around my bird. You want to make sure you get right up close to it in some spots. And then I'm going to take a little sap green and drop that in as well. And feel free to add more water as you go. You don't have to just keep adding pigment. You want this to be light and airy. Okay. And less is more sometimes. Okay, all right, so that's half of it. We don't want it to get too muddy. It will dry on its own. It will lighten. It'll keep moving. So we're going to come around this way. And again, keeping those edges organic. You're not painting like a perfect square. Oop, oh, that black was definitely not dry yet. And I touched it, but that's okay. You can see it bleeding out right there. So do give yourself some time between layers to let things really dry and cure. Use a heat tool or a hair dryer. That can help speed things up a little bit if you're very impatient. And I'm not going to go all the way around the bottom of the tail. I'm going to let the tail kind of break the line of the composition here. Okay, and now I'm going to add in some more cerulean. Ooh, that was like really dark cerulean. But that's okay. At least there was a lot of water on the page for that. Drop some in over here. Oh, again. Really dark, out of control. Sorry. And then a little bit of sap green. Especially like around some of the branches and in those areas. And we're going to put more detail on top of this. So don't be too worried about like making everything perfect and look like, oh, this needs to be right around the branch and the tree. No, we're going to put that in a minute. This is just the background that it's going to sit on. I am noticing this side is still a little wet. I'm going to add a little bit more color over here because this side is actually much brighter than the other side. So I want to make sure those brightnesses match. Let's drop in a little bit more. There we go. And this can be so fun. Just really play with it. You can even like drop in some droplets of water, which will, as they dry, kind of create texture and change the background. All right, so now we really have to let this whole thing dry before we add in the final details of the pine. Okay, so let's let that happen. I'm going to use camera magic and we're going to cut to the next scene, but give yourself a good 10 to 15 minutes to really let it dry. Use your heat tool, come back, and then we will finish the details. All right, we are back and my Cardinal is completely dry along with the background. I would mention, which you may have already done though, but you can tape down the edges as your piece dries so that it dries flat, especially if you're using a heat tool. That can tend to make your paper curl if you're not holding it down. So let's go into our pine, making some pine sprigs out of these branches. You could certainly leave the piece just like this. I think it looks lovely, but we're gonna go the extra mile and add a little extra. So let me get a bunch of sap green. This is core sap green, my absolute favorite sap green. And I am also gonna pick up, you could go with just the sap green if you wanted, but I'm gonna pick up some phthalo blue and add it. And that really deepens and creates this beautiful, what I would consider the like quintessential pine color. Okay. So now that that's mixed, I'm going to pick up my rigger brush. I'm going to really saturate it, and I'm going to pick some areas that are going to be, so these smaller branches I'm going to add pine sprigs to. So I'm going to start at the base here, and I'm just going to make long, and I'm just going to keep going up and up and up and up like this. Okay, and then I'm going to find another kind of little branch and use that as my base. So some of these pine sprigs you can see are going to overlap each other. So this one is going this way, this one is attached to it going that way. And just creating layers. And feel free to go back in with some darker color over some of them to create some depth. So you can see it's a little darker here than over there. I'm going to come up here. Do this one at the base, and then this little branch off of it. And this is a real, when I teach this one in class, people have trouble with, they hold their brush like a pencil, so their lines can only be so long. You know, they get pretty short. But if you hold it a little higher up and just use your hand as, you know, you're going to use your whole wrist, and your fingers are going to act as a lever. And you're going to swish all the way up. And you do have to reload your brush a lot with these because you're using a lot of paint. And the rigger brushes only hold so much paint. All right, so we've done that side there. I'm going to come over here and do some here. Actually, I'm going to add in and there's all different types of pine needles, which is cool. There's short and chubbier ones. There's ones that are kind of almost like chandelier. I don't know. That's the only way I can think of to describe it, but it's like a long branch and then it has little ones kind of dangling off of it. So go look up all your different types of pine and try to recreate those. These are just super easy, the long, really long kind of thin sprigs. I don't know what kind of pine it is. If it's spruce or yada yada yada. So, but all right, I'm gonna go off of this one here. And you don't have to do every, I'm moving pretty quickly here. You can go slower than this, but it's very repetitive, so I don't want you to get totally bored on the video. So this you can take as little time or as much time, make it as sparse or as full as you want it. I am going to do one down here, but I'm going to leave these branches as just kind of branches with nothing on them. I'm going to do one here, and then I'm going to put a few kind of right in front of our cardinal. But the rigger brush makes this super easy, as you can see. Okay. Now I'm going to go kind of like, as there's one like sitting right here over the branch. I get some really dark color for that. Have it covering up. So this is just trying to make it really look like this bird is nestled into this section here. So we're going to add some texture overlapping, like right around the edge here. And even over the tail. There we go. And that really incorporates the bird, you know, brings it all together, makes it look three-dimensional, overlapping, not like we just sat the bird next to the pine or on the branch. All right, so there we go. Our pine is done. You could add in berries if you want. You can go even do different kinds of pine in different areas or different kinds of coniferous trees, because I don't know if they're all pine actually. Okay, so the last few steps is bleed proof white. You can certainly go back and add more texture anywhere that you would like. Your painting is only done when you say it's done, so there can definitely be more layers, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go in with my bleed proof white. So Dr. Peach Martin's bleed proof white, link in the description. Love this stuff for fine details. So I'm going to add a tiny little additional highlight to the eye just to show you, like, you can add little highlights. You can go back in and even like re-widen the circle around the eye if for some reason you mess up and have a rogue brush stroke in there. So you can do that. I'm going to add a tiny little highlight like along the beak, the upper lip of the beak there, and like on the top here. If you ever kind of go too much with the bleed proof white, what you can do is just wet your brush and blend it out, and then pick it up with a paper towel and then go back over it with paint that, you know, in your area. So if I wanted to get rid of this highlight, I could blend it out like this with some water. And then it kind of turns everything gray. You know, you have to do this kind of close to the time when you put it on. Pick it up with a paper towel and then go back over that area with a little bit more of the color you had already had on there. Okay, so no need to worry or be nervous about adding in these fine little details. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry again and add that highlight back, but I wanted to show you that. Okay, so I'm also gonna add some, I like to add some like little highlight feathers back here. Like the sun is kind of hitting on the back and it just makes everything pop a little bit more. It adds that contrast, so it makes your bright colors look even brighter. I'm going to put a few little highlights around the eye here. And then I'm also going to put one up here. And you know, this crown here up top for this guy, I'm going to put a few up here to add some texture. But I'm actually going to go back in with my little brush and some straight cadmium red. And I'm just going to add a few more. It was a little too flat for me up there. So let's zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so here I just added these little feathers, these little edges of texture, because it was kind of like too flat. Like his head just stopped there. But this is all like feathers coming to a big point up here. There we go. So you can see just these little few pokes of white really just make everything else kind of pop and sing. All right. And last but not least, if you want to add some snow, this could be a nice little snowy day. Some snow in the air. You can take your bleed proof white. If you have like a rougher brush, like I sometimes use this really scraggly rough brush to add my snow, or a toothbrush. Toothbrushes will add really, really fine dots. A regular paintbrush will add really kind of varied sizes, but some really big blobs. I'm going to use this paintbrush, but it's very like scraggly here. Now, if there's any part of the painting you want to protect, like I don't want any drops right on the cardinal's face. So I'm just going to cover it up just like this. Like it can be on his head and on his body, but just, you know, I don't want any weird drops right in the middle of the eyeball that changes the shape of it. So I'm just going to cover it up. I'm going to take my bleed proof white in this really rough brush here. And I'm just going to take, and this is a little messy, I'm not going to lie, it can be a little messy. You want your bleed proof white to be a little bit watery. And you can just do as much or as little. So you can see here, like I wouldn't want that right on his face, but on his body, it's fine. Add some more texture. And you can see if you need to go in and add 1 or 2 dots, like if you wanted to, you're like, oh, it just looks too blank up here. You can go in and gently just kind of, don't go crazy, because once you start doing it yourself, it doesn't look organic, but gently add 1 or 2. So now our cardinal is in the snow. And there we are, our cardinal finally complete. A little cardinal in the snow in our little pine branch. I'm Shayna Cersei. Thank you so much for painting with me today. As always, it's a pleasure. Feel free to check out that description for a list of supplies and materials, as well as links to my supplies and a link to my studio crew if you're interested in joining me in there, as well as getting the outlines for the free tutorials on YouTube, in addition to many other tutorials that are access only through the studio crew. Thanks so much, everybody. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day. Happy painting, all.